So you're at the top of your career, an expert in your field, and then one day it all ends. Unexpectedly, prematurely, the ending was not at all in your plans. So where is God, and what is he doing when the passion of your life comes to a screeching halt? Well, Dave Welker spent his career as a sought-after orthopedic surgeon, or as he likes to refer to himself, a bone doc. But then, unexpectedly, due to a health issue, Dave had to end his practice. So I sat down with Dave and his wife, Missy, to talk about the emotions of making the decision to end the practice and then transitioning to another stage of life. They are very open as they share they're still working through the process. So join me in a rich and moving conversation with Dave and Missy Welker. So Dave and Missy, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
It's good to be here.
Really appreciate it.
It's good to be back in Pittsburgh.
That's great. Well, we have a lot to talk about, but you told me right before we went on, you're headed to Oklahoma. So you got to be like so excited about that.
Well, it is like a dream come true.
We've heard so much about it throughout the years. Can't wait to see it.
The prairies, just the scenery. It's just going to be fantastic.
You're going to stop in Perry, Oklahoma.
Well, I'm not sure where Perry is, but if we have a free afternoon, we're going to make that happen.
Perry, Pride of the Prairie.
Okay.
Oh,
wow.
nice. Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. So you got to check that out.
I can see why you love it.
I have been looking so forward to talk to you guys about your story, God's story, in your life. So we're going to talk about a lot of things, but Dave, I want to jump right in to kind of the middle of this thing, right? So you're at the top of your game. You're an orthopedic surgeon. You have done just about every surgery there is to perform in that area. You know your way in and out. When there's a challenge, you know how to get out of that. When you see something you haven't seen, probably that doesn't happen often, but you know exactly where to go on that. So top of your game, right? And you're in your office, you're doing surgery, you're working on a guy's ankle, and something happens. Share that story.
Yeah, well, that's kind of just right where things kind of came to the top of the issues. So leading up to that point, I had probably had some level of symptoms in my hands with regards to noticing just a little bit of dysfunction or a little bit of spasticity when I would be working. I would notice that when I was really doing some fine work that required a lot of like a pinch strength, I would notice that my hands would have a little bit of spasticity. But then I would always kind of just write that off and just kind of work them out and shake it off, so to speak, and get back and my hands would function fine. But that had gotten increasingly frequent and increasingly significant. But I could rationalize that. And part of that rationalization, I think, was a little bit of fear about what could be going on. And so I just sat on those symptoms for probably upwards of about a year and a half. And then I had a gentleman who had a really pretty bad ankle fracture, but he had some lower extremity deformities that required me to position him a little bit differently in the operating room. And it was during that positioning of him and his leg in the operating room where I almost, if I wasn't holding on, I would have fallen over flat on my face. And that's when it culminated in me saying, well, there's definitely something wrong. And so I just compartmentalized that, put that in the back. I finished my day of operating, went golfing, came home, had dinner, and I didn't say anything to Miss. And I hadn't said anything at all to Missy about my concerns. But then I woke up at probably 2 or 3 in the morning, and Missy woke up, which is
not common.
Not common. But then I asked her a couple of questions because I had some fears of what the diagnosis might be, and did she notice my speech being a problem? Did she notice me slurring my words or struggling to come up with words? And she declined that, but she said, I just think, you need to get checked out. Enough is enough. It's starting to affect your sleep patterns, and so you need to get checked out. So I went to the office, and I had the fortune of having access to an MRI. And so I called the guy at our hospital, and I said, hey, after office, would you mind just doing a scan of my neck? Because I knew that there could be some pathology in my neck leading to at least some of my symptoms. And so I finished seeing patients. I hopped in the MRI scanner, got an MRI, and I took it over to my office, put it in the computer, scrolled through, and I remember I called one of my partners at that time. I called him over and I said, hey, I've never mentioned anything like this. Would you mind taking a look at my MRI with me because I'm obviously biased. And so he sat down, we looked at the MRI, and he's like, wow, there's a problem there in your lower cervical spine that could be the issue. And so I was relieved at that point that there was an identifiable anatomical lesion that could be responsible for all of my symptoms. And so I did all my training at WVU. I called the residency coordinator, who was still the same residency coordinator as when I did my residency down there, and said, hey, can you get me in to see our spine surgeon that helped train me? And she said, yeah, sure, come down tomorrow. So I operated in the morning, and I canceled my office in the afternoon and had an appointment. And so that then led us down the exam and the findings and all that kind of stuff that the lesion in my neck could have explained some, but not all. And this is where the fear that I mentioned just a little bit ago was on full display, because he said to me, your neck can explain some of your symptoms, but definitely not all of them. Some of my symptoms were odd for a herniated disc in my neck. And so he said, you really need to be worked up for MS, you need to be worked up for ALS. And that was the dreaded thing that I was most fearful of, and why I ignored those symptoms.
Missy, go back to the time when you guys kind of woke up in the middle of the night, and life's like moving on, and you don't have any idea of anything going on, and then all of a sudden you hear some things are happening. Now, this was early on, and you hadn't had a diagnosis yet, but just kind of talk through some of your response to that.
I think because it was medical, the concern that we were having was medical, everything medical with Dave in our relationship, I just deferred to him. So if he was concerned, I would be concerned, and if he wasn't, I wouldn't be. So I think I reacted because I saw the concern. I had kind of thought, like he had mentioned a little bit about his hands, but not too much. So I wasn't too worried about it, and things tend to work out. And so I think I encouraged him to do that. And then in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, if this is what it is, God's not surprised. God's not, up there wringing his hands. So he knows this is coming, and he'll prepare what we need to have prepared ahead of us, and we'll go ahead with it. I think I stayed maybe not pretty calm through most of it. But, I think I just deferred to him a lot because it was medical.
So you go and you get the workup at WVU, and they start mentioning things like MS and ALS. Now that probably was highlighted in your mind, because that was a time when a good friend of ours here, Tunch Ilkin, was going through. I think that was the time he was going through, and kind of at the later stages of ALS. Yep. And so, Dave, you were pretty convinced in your mind that was it, right?
Yeah, I can remember being in that room talking with the doctor about the differential diagnosis, and ALS was definitely at the top. And I can remember thinking that even if I have ALS, that's not treatable, but I still have this problem in my neck, which isn't going to go away. So I was pretty good at compartmentalizing that area of this journey. And so I just said to myself that, I've got to deal with one thing at a time. And so I got to get my neck fixed, and I got to get better from that. And if I can get better from that, and I have ALS, I'll deal with the ALS later. And so that's what I did. I made that decision on the spot to go ahead and have surgery on my neck. And that was probably, between that decision and the actual surgery was probably a span of about 2 weeks. And so during that 2 weeks is when, I'm an early riser. I'm the only early riser in my family. Okay, I'm an island.
Except for 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah, right.
For whatever reason.
So, and you can imagine, I was never a good sleeper, and this just kind of intensified that that part of my life. And so I was alone. I'll never forget being alone on Saturday morning. My brother's also an orthopedic surgeon, and I was sitting at my kitchen table looking out over the swimming pool, and I was just 100% convinced that I had ALS. Now, I had been worked up for MS. I had an MRI of my brain, which was clean, and I had a couple of other tests that turned out to be inconclusive for ALS. So I had hard, factual evidence that, at least at this point, I had no substantial chance that I had ALS. But being alone and being tired and being afraid is opportunity for a foothold to be established. And I do think that was the case. So I called my brother, and I was distraught, to say the least. And I think what he said to me, I just won't forget. And there's a benefit of having close friends in the field that can speak truth when you need it. And I definitely needed that. So he basically said, Dave, you feel like you have ALS, but your MRI says you don't. Your other testing says that you don't. So if you're the doctor and the patient says, well, I feel like I have an arthritic knee, and the x-rays don't bear that out, what are you telling them as a doctor? And so I was like, okay. So I felt like I had ALS, but I was making a decision based on feelings, and we know the dangers of that. And so it really helped that Mike was able to speak that truth into me.
You mentioned 3 things there that I think are so significant. And many are listening, and they're going through some challenges, and maybe they've gotten a bad report, or they're coming up with some tests, and then our mind just kind of takes over, right? So you're a doctor. Your profession is based on facts, right? I remember you telling a mutual friend, who thought the issue he had was bigger. You said, you're not going to die. You're not going to die from this little knee strain. Just get a grip, right?
You got to remember that.
And then, this is bigger than a knee strain for you, but alone, tired, and afraid. Man, those things go together, don't they? Missy, talk about that a little bit as you saw Dave kind of working through that. And again, you're doing it together. It's weird, isn't it? You're doing it together, but you're doing it alone at the same time. Right. And so how did you kind of see what Dave was going through, and talk about your time with God during that time? Like, what kind of conversations are you having with God?
Well, I think at that point I was working, and fortunately I was in an environment that was very supportive. I had really good people around me that knew I was going through this, and Dave's surgery was very public. Everybody knew to pray about it. So I was able to have that support from people at work asking, are you doing okay? Can I pray for you? That type of thing. So, and we had a really great small group at that point. So we shared a lot of things with them, and we just had good friends around us that really came in and checked in on us and talked us through things, talked us down from things. I think that was really the big key takeaway. And I think when you go through like trials, I remember going through other trials we had gone through with the kids in high school, and you remember how faithful God is at that point. And those experiences remind you when another trial comes along, he'll be faithful. So I think we tried to remember that. I mean, it's hard in the moment to grasp that, but I think, remembering how faithful he was in the past helps you get through whatever you're going through in the present.
Dave, there's much more to this story we're going to get to, but let's take a pause and talk to that person right now who's sitting where you were on those days early in the morning when you were overlooking the pool. And the doctors have said, it could be this, it could be this, it's probably not this. And now their mind's racing, right? And they're alone, tired, and afraid. Talk to that person and encourage them right now.
Well, I just think it's really staying alone and tired and afraid is not good. And so reaching out to a friend, a brother, to kind of bounce things off of. Because I think when you're under that stress of insecurity and foundationally rocking what your ground is on, can lead you down some really, really dark places. And so I was extraordinarily thankful for my brother. I always am, but during that time, he was profoundly impactful to me. And other friends that are not in the medical field. I just think that broadening the circle of your relationships during that time, and having and leaning on those relationships that I had really worked hard on leading up to that, and doing life with other people allowed those people then to kind of walk beside me and Miss during that time.
Always important to have someone with us, right? And knowing your brother, he probably lightened the load a little bit. He always told me he was better looking than you, smarter than you, and a better doctor than you.
The only thing I have is I have more hair than he does. So that's it. That's all I hold over him.
And that's something. I will say that's something. So you have to have surgery. So you have surgery on your neck. So kind of walk through that. And again, that's impacting your practice.
It is.
You have to go through that. You don't know exactly how you're going to recover from that. So talk through that part of the story.
Yeah, so the medical part of my story, I just never really got too worked up about surgery. I mean, that was my world. And so I could make that decision pretty easily. I operated half the days of my career. And so for some outside of the medical field or outside the surgery world, it's a huge deal. And I'm not minimizing or trivializing that decision, but it was natural for me. I had an anatomical problem, and there was a surgical fix, so I did it, and I had it done, and it went well. And my symptoms in my hands improved almost immediately. Like, I stayed a night at the hospital, which was just a torturous night because I think I was by the loudest door in the hospital, and I couldn't sleep, and so I was walking the halls at 2:00 in the morning, and I was testing my hands because I wanted to know if I did the right thing, and I could tell a difference that night that my hands were not as spastic. And so I did notice an improvement right off the bat. And so I was like, okay, great. I'm going to go back to work. But I also had some issues with the nerves in my arms. So 3 weeks after I had my neck operated on, I had both my arms operated on to decompress the nerves leading to my hands, because I just wanted to make sure that I had a clean nerve from my brain to my hands. And so I got that surgery then 3 weeks after I had my neck operated on. And I improved, all of which was done to kind of stop the progression of the problem in my neck. It was never the intent for me to get improvement. It was to stop the progression of my neurological issues in my hands. And so I think it worked, and which then led me to be able to go back to work. But simultaneously, things had deteriorated with my practice in Pittsburgh, and so we were looking to potentially make a move professionally as well. And I think God was moving us out of Pittsburgh. And so while I was recovering from surgery, I was also contemplating a move professionally.
That was a challenging time, making the decision. Again, at the top of your game with your practice, and now there's some challenges there. And then you guys decided to go to Ohio. And not only were you involved in church, you were very involved in the community and in 2 or 3 different ministries that I know of, and probably many more. You had a tremendous friend base here, like you said, Missy, who are praying for you, and now you're kind of uprooting those things. So you got a lot of things going on with health, with some uncertainty, and now uprooting and going to Ohio. Talk through that, Missy. What was that like to kind of go through that emotion?
It was almost like a fire hose of change. I feel like it was almost more than I could probably process at the time. I think we're still processing a lot of it. You really learn to appreciate simple things when you leave a place, the familiarity, the ease of which you can get from point A to point B. Just the simple things really became difficult when you moved. It did cause a lot of reflection about how grateful we were for our time here. I think it really put in perspective what's important as far as relationships and what you want to put your time into. Like right now, Dave and I have been talking a lot about like putting the first things first, the main things, because as we want to hit this next phase of our life, I want to make sure we've got the right things in there. Because when we went to Ohio, I felt like we were trying to replicate what we had in Pittsburgh, and you can't do that, And we were here for 20 years, and we couldn't compare year 1 in Ohio to year 20 in Pittsburgh. But we had to allow ourselves some time to mourn what we lost when we moved. But trying to look forward to some new chapter with it.
So, Dave, you go back to work. You start working with your brother in his practice there. Missy, you're not. You're kind of. You were working here, but so it's a little different for you. Was that even a harder process for you?
It was. We moved into an apartment, so we went from our home where we raised our kids into an apartment, and sold all of our things here. Packed things away, took our house apart here, and then we were building a home in Ohio. So that consumed a lot of my time, basically. But it was empty nest, apartment, move, change. So a lot of that. We also had Dave's parents move out, so I got involved with them a good bit and trying to help them with their transition. And but yeah, there was a lot of days of, wow, what do I have here? After having so much here in Pittsburgh.
So you moved to Ohio. You're in a new practice. You're with your brother. You guys have a great relationship. Talk about that. How did that go, and what were some of the next things that happened in that journey?
Yeah, so I continued to follow up with further workup for ALS. I saw another neurologist who basically said I don't have any increased chance of ALS than anybody else in my age bracket. So I'm not at a higher chance of developing that just because of what has been going on with me medically. So I always still have a little bit of concern about that. And so when we finally decided to make that switch and make that move, part of my concern was that what if I go out there and I can't do it? I just can't work. My hands don't work like they should. And so I talked to Mike about that, and I was kind of hired out there to fill a very big void in the health network that I was joining, because I am an orthopedic surgeon but specialize in foot and ankle reconstruction. And there was no other foot and ankle orthopedically trained foot and ankle surgeon in the entire network of about 750 physicians. And so there was a huge void in that arena. Then I was kind of brought out there to fill that void. And so I was concerned that there would be an unmet expectation if I got out there and couldn't fill that void to their expectation. So we had talked about that, and that was on the table. And so he's like, you just make the move, and if it happens, it happens. And so we did. I kind of jumped in full bore, and you can imagine with that referral basis already established, the busyness of work would pick up relatively quickly, and it did. And I got busy pretty quickly. But I don't know how long after we moved out there, hon. Was it
Year and a
8
half.
months or a year, whatever,
Yeah,
that I started developing those same symptoms that I had in my hands, which I ignored. So I promised Missy and I promised myself that if that would happen, that I wouldn't ignore that. So I learned from the past, and I talked to my wife about it this time.
How about
Didn't wait
that?
for being woken up in the middle of the night.
So I didn't wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning now and talk to her. It was more of a controlled environment. And so I was like, I just need to get another MRI in my neck. So when you have surgery in your neck and you have a fusion like I had, typically the level above or below that fusion is under a lot more stress, and that's the one that will be affected by progression of that process. But that's not what happened to me. I had a level 6-7 fuse in my neck. The level up from that would be 5-6, which was perfectly fine. And so, but the problem with me now was the level 4-5. Had another herniated disc, which was now pinching my spinal cord at a level up. So then I was faced with the decision of what to do. And the options aren't great for a 54-year-old guy who depends on his hands for work. And so I sought counsel from a surgeon out in the network that I was working, and I also sought advice of the guy who trained me and who had already operated on me, both of whom said you either get half of your neck essentially fused or quit. And so, mind you, I had done all of this so that I could continue to work. And I endured those recoveries and all of that to keep my hands functioning. And here I am now under contract of a big health network, filled a huge void, and the expectations of my brother, kind of working together. We had been to Africa together working, and now it was kind of the dream come true. We get to work together for the final chapter of both of our careers. And I looked at that MRI in disbelief, thinking that I can't have half my neck fused at 54. And the surgeon that I saw out there said, look, if you can quit, you should quit. And so, we talked about that. And
let us in on that conversation. That had to be, I'm assuming a fusion like that puts a lot of mobility issues on your neck for the rest of your life.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're talking about lifestyle situation.
Right.
And yet, this is what you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talk about our spiritual identity, and we know it's in Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what you dreamed about doing, and you're good at it. You're great at it. You're filling a huge void. That had to be a pretty emotional conversation back and forth.
Yeah, I think it was one of those things where, in my eyes, I wanted him to take care of him. He spends a lot of his time taking care of others, and the risk of what could potentially keep happening to him in the OR, not just the physical part of it, but the worry of what's happening to my hands. How am I going to be able to perform in the OR? Am I doing my job to the best of my ability? All of those stresses I wanted gone for him. So I was like, I didn't think twice. I was like, if we can do this, if I have to go back to work, whatever we have to do, let's sit down and figure it out and get you healthy. Because I think that was the main concern at that point for me.
Right.
And I didn't even think about that part, David. Not only the physical part, but the emotional part. Like, am I going to be able to help this patient? You know,
Right.
that I'm having.
Yeah, that weighed heavily on me. You know, I 100% believe that when my hands were working, I was fine, and it was intermittent in presentation. So, you know, I would have to take breaks in the operating room. But in between my hands malfunctioning, they worked perfectly fine. But if I look at, and we've had lots of time to process this now, and decisions were made. I did end up quitting. I did end up I haven't operated for 6 months, which is the longest span of not being in that environment for probably the last 30 years. And so I look at why my disc was at 4.5 and not at 5.6 like it was supposed to be. I honestly believe that if it was at 5.6, I would have had another surgery on my neck, and I would have kept working. But the idea of you only have 7 cervical vertebrae, and the idea of half of them being immobile at 54 is just not good for what happens at 64 and what happens at 74. And so my surgeon out in Ohio said, you can't think of the next surgery. You've got to think 2 or 3 surgeries down the road. And this is what you have to kind of look at. And so he said, if you can swing it, you need to quit. And so I do think that as I look back retrospectively now and really think about why 4.5, there's something that God has for me and Miss. We don't know what that is yet. There's something there. My disc would have been at 5.6 if I were supposed to keep working, because I would have. I 100% know that I would have, but it wasn't. It was at 4.5, and it was at 4.5 for a reason, and so. Sometimes God speaks in whispers, and this one wasn't a whisper. I think he whispered for probably 3 or 4 years leading up to this point, and me being bullheaded and stubborn ignored that. And this one was a megaphone saying, look, you need to stop, and if you don't stop, I'll stop you.
You know, one of the things I always loved about you guys and your walk with Christ was you were very public about it. You invested in many, many things in the community and in church. And I know that when you had the opportunity, appropriately, you would share Christ with your patients. And I think, part of worship, if we don't honor God in our work, we're part-time worshipers because we work a lot, right? Work a large portion of our life. And so those things are gone. Dave, Missy, talk about we're going to talk about where you are now in a second, but talk about some of the conversations you had with God at that time. It's kind of like grieving process, right? Putting to death something that has been alive in my life all this time. Was there, certainly there were questions, was there anger, was there, bitterness? Like, how did you you're 6 months away from that. We'll talk about where you are now in a minute, but how did you work through that? What were some of the things you did to work through that, or some of the things that you experienced as you worked through it?
I have a very vivid memory of being very angry in Ohio, just realizing that we had walked away from here, and when we got there, just what wasn't there. I remember just taking that anger to the Lord in my car, for lack of a better location. I tend to do a lot of processing in my car. And realizing he was like, I can take it. I can take your anger. And it felt good to get rid of it, because I felt like it was coming out in different places. So I just finally took that to him. And he was good and faithful to take that. There's one theme that I've felt like had carried us through a lot through all that is him just being our anchor and him being constant. Even when I was angry, he didn't, reject me because of my anger or my sadness.
Go take a time out until you can.
Yeah, he didn't want me to clean that up. He's like, bring that here. And just really grateful for that. So I do have memories of just being angry and realizing, I'm grieving. I'm grieving a lot. But I don't know if...
For me, it wasn't so much anger as it was just uncertainty. I questioned our move to Ohio. I questioned why. I never was like, woe is me kind of thing, but I just questioned. I questioned why he would allow us to leave what we were working on in Pittsburgh and just leave that all behind, whether that's ministry, work, friends. When you're in a place for 20 plus years, it becomes home. And so I just questioned why he would allow us to make those decisions to move out of that and into a small apartment and live there for a year and a half and then take my job away. I just questioned that. I was never angry or sad. I just was kind of bewildered. And so, but like Missy said, I found him to be true to his promise, and he won't ever leave us. He won't ever forsake us. And we really clung to that because while my brother and his family received us well, they weren't there a lot of the time, nor should they have been there a lot of the time. And so there we were in this place where we needed GPS to get to the grocery store. And still sometimes do.
That's a whole nother issue.
Yes, it is.
So we were alone, but we were together and alone simultaneously, and we cried together and we prayed together, and we still do those things. And so we're still working through God's plan for this next phase of our life.
Talk about your marriage. You guys have had a great marriage. Not perfect. No one's marriage is.
No.
Well, Dave said it was perfect.
Well, yeah.
That's what he always told me.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
it's not perfect.
No.
But how did you, you got to work through this thing together. You guys are a team in this.
Yeah. I think it's improved our marriage. Like, we kind of know that we're each other's person, and we're united. Like, I've never felt like we weren't on the same team in this. Like, one thing that we've talked about, one of us can be pretty down, but the other one's maybe not as far down, but we're never really both down at the same time hard. Like, we've been able to kind of encourage each other. I think it's been honestly great for our marriage, and the fact that it does cause you to reassess your time, your commitments, your relationships, and it has had that impact for us. Like, how do we want our marriage to look, and now that he's not working, it's been how do we look on a day-to-day basis? What do we want to do together? What do we want to do apart? I don't know. I think it's been great for our marriage. That's one thing I think, it's just remained pretty steady through it all.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we had a great marriage prior to this. And we kind of did have practice with trials, with raising adolescents. We had some challenges. I mean, I know
couple times.
I know your family was without challenges.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, for sure.
So we had some work to do, and we had some knockdown, drag out things in adolescence where, Missy may have taken things a little bit hard, but I wasn't kind of down at that level. So I think what we found is that that training of parenting, we never lost sight of the fact that we were each other's match. And so when Missy was down, I wasn't down quite as much, and when I was down in the doldrums, she wasn't down quite as much. So it was I told Missy just the other day, I love God's plan for a family, and Missy was the rock when I couldn't be, and I was when she couldn't be, and I think that thankfulness for that design during those times, I'll forever be grateful for that.
One thing that you said, and I hope I say this right. You can correct me. You said trying to find or seeking to find the peace of Christ in the simple things of life. Life to this point has been very busy, really a lot of wheels spinning, plates spinning, and now some of those things have been taken away. And so learning who Christ is and the peace that only he can give in the simple times of life as you wait and pray and prepare. He's preparing you, right? He never wastes our time preparing you for this next step. But what's that been like? What have you found that peace to be like?
As a career in orthopedics, patience has never, ever, even prior to a career in orthopedics, patience was never anything I was good at. If I was worse at anything more than sleep, it was probably patience. And so
our joke is that we want patience now.
Right.
You know,
right now.
we want it right now. And so I found that seeking that patience and waiting on his plan has brought some challenges for me. But it's also brought some answers. Like my dad just had open heart surgery, had 4-vessel bypass about almost 2 months ago now, and we were there, and we were able to take care of them, and able to cut their grass, and able to, go to the doctor's appointments with them. And if I was still working, I never would have been able to do that. And so waiting on him to reveal next steps has been challenging for me, because now that my dad is kind of back on his feet, not 100% recovered yet, but it has brought us to the point now where, okay, what's next? I want to be patient, but I don't want to be lazy or complacent either. We feel as if we still have a lot of gas in the tank, and we want to do great things. So trying to force them, or trying not to force them, is challenging for me.
We're type A, and I like lists and plans, and trying not to force the issue is probably the bigger challenge for us. When we, especially with the move, we went out to Ohio and we're like, we're just going to replicate it. Let's find this group that we are involved in and this mission we are involved in and just do that. And I don't know if that's completely what God has, but we're, trying to say, wait for him to reveal it for us without being too pushy with it.
For those listening and they're going through a major transition in life, and when we said earlier, it's a broad category of major transitions, right? What advice would you have for them?
God doesn't change who he is, and he is faithful. He's omnipotent. He's sovereign over everything, and we like to think that we're a carve out, that he doesn't have me, and I think that's a whisper from Satan. But he does keep his promises, and while they may not be instantaneous, I'm hopeful that he'll remain true to who he says he is, and he has thus far. So why would I think differently now? And so I hang my hat on that, fully anticipating that there's goodness for us to do. What that is, where that may be, is yet to be defined. But I think that's kind of what we're working on right now. And it's kind of all we have to hold on to is that He's true.
Missy, how would you? What advice would you give that person out
I
there?
think I would say allow yourself to grieve. I think for a while I was like, no, I'm just going to force myself to be happy, and I'm going to, make a plan. But I think it's a little bit better just to allow yourself to grieve. It means you had something great, and it means you loved, and you missed things, and that means they were good. And just remember that God will provide that again for you, and it's there. It may not look the same, it may not come at your pace, but he'll show up.
So, Dave, as we wrap up, again, I appreciate you guys so much and sharing this story that I know is going to be very encouraging to many people. Would you pray for those going through some challenging times? They're waiting on the Lord. Waiting's hard. They may be where you have been, and they're waiting on the results of a test, or they're waiting on that surgery, or they have these 15 possibilities of things in their mind, and they don't know what the diagnosis is going to be. So a lot to pray for, but if you would kind of wrap us up in prayer, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for your love. We're so grateful for your kindness. We're so grateful that you have a story for all of us. God, I pray for those who are struggling with diagnosis and uncertainty. I just pray that you draw near to them, that you're with them wherever they may be in their season of insecurity or season of doubt or season of fear. I just pray that you would be real to them, walk beside them and comfort them. Whatever outcome that you have for them, just have them know that your presence is undeniably close. God, thanks for your love. Thanks for your Son. Thanks for the promise of salvation for those who trust in Him. Thank you that you come to us when we are unclean and remain unclean, but you saw it as your plan to rescue us in the depths of our dirtiness. Thank you, God, for loving us. Thank you for saving us. And it's your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you guys so much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ron.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so thankful for Dave and Missy and their willingness to share their story. So many times you hear stories and they're all buttoned up with a clear ending, and the ending always seems to work out, right? But I know many of you can relate to Dave and Missy, who were very open that they are still in process. They're still working through it. And that's where many of you are right now. And I just want to encourage you. God's in control. What surprised you, what was unexpected to you, was not unexpected to Him, did not surprise Him. And you know what? He does His best work in the process. And I know many of you are right in the middle of the process, right in the middle of exciting personal growth. Man, keep leaning hard on God. I want to thank you for joining today's podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and be sure to like our podcast. That helps us share amazing stories like this to more people. And I want to thank our podcast team for making this episode possible. Our executive director is Jen Booth. Ryan Jorgen produces each podcast. Mark James delivers each podcast to you, and Laura Crane promotes each episode through social media. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. Like I said, be sure to hit like. That simple tap on your screen helps us deliver this message to more and more people. Hey, thanks so much for joining us on today's podcast.